Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry Saravia at the movies. So this is a topic that, in light of all the attention now that Star Wars is getting, renewed attention, and deservedly so, I thought it would be a good time to bring up the original 1977 film Star Wars. Now, I'm not reviewing the film, but I'm reviewing the hype of the film, and why I think it garnered a certain kind of a reputation amongst Cine East's film connoisseurs, the elitists, and a negative and rather troubling reputation as a result. See, what happened was that when Star Wars came out in 1977, first of all, a year before, or about 6 months before the film came out, Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher told the story. They saw the trailer, a teaser, which is a really horrible teaser, by the way, but worth checking out. It might be on YouTube. They saw the teaser for the film, and they went into a movie theater, and they knew the teaser would be playing, so they watched the teaser. It was advertised like if it was some sort of a sci-fi B-movie that would be shown on any Saturday night, or you know, nothing, nothing very underwhelming, and I'll just put it that way, extremely underwhelming. No actual, I don't even remember if footage of the film was shown, but basically they went in there, they saw this teaser, and I guess they also wanted to see the reaction from the audience. And the audience booed. They were like, oh, please, like, we'll see you next summer in this galaxy, this sort of thing. And that's kind of what the trailer, the narrator was saying. So they, obviously Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher were saying, this might be a disaster after all. Because you have to remember, when George Lucas made the movie, it was considered, he was a director who had only done 2 films prior, THX 1138, which was based on a short film he had done when he was at USC, and American Graffiti. So that was really it. And Star Wars was a big budget, extravaganza, and at least technically, he still didn't have the budget to do the type of effects he really wanted to do, as I'm sure most of you know. So, it was frowned upon, this particular movie, during production, during the making of it. And nobody thought this movie would do any sort of business. And so, of course, that all changed on May of 1977 when it started playing in theaters. And, well, we all know what a phenomenon it became. But what's most troubling is when people say, well, Star Wars is responsible for the death of cinema. Every few years, it seems, or every decade, this argument comes up. And it's a silly, counterproductive, and totally ignorant comment to make. Because first of all, we have to remember one thing. Before Star Wars, in terms of mega blockbusters, there weren't that many. Really, when you think about it, actually, when you really think about it, when you adjust the dollars for, adjust inflation rather, Gone with the Wind is the #1 box office champ of all time. Not Star Wars, and not Avatar, as many would like you to believe, but it's not the case. So, Star Wars is, I forget what number, but it's not even up to the standards set by Gone with the Wind. Now, does anybody think Gone with the Wind really destroyed cinema back in 1939? No, of course not. Star Wars came along because it was more popular than air. I mean, it was in the air. You couldn't get away from it. Kind of like in 1989 when Tim Burton's Batman came out that summer. That is all you saw, was that bat signal. It was the weirdest, strangest thing. Something that even Kevin Smith, director of Clerks, had brought up on his college circuit, where he talks to various colleges about the films he's made. But it is true that bad signal, that's all people cared about. So when Star Wars came out, that was it. I mean, there was nothing else. It was a pop phenomenon, the likes of which you rarely see anymore. When you get right down to it, most movies that are shown in theaters, they cause a bit of a rift, and then they're gone from theaters, and before you know it, they're on DVD or Blu-ray, and then it's on cable, and it's like, well, whatever happened to the theatrical experience, of the movie? So Star Wars has been unfairly maligned in being responsible for the destruction of cinema as we know it, independent cinema. That's really the studio's fault. It is not the fault of the film. And it's not really the fault of the audiences, because audiences, let's be honest, I go to films to see different types of films all the time. Maybe on this show I don't cover enough other types of films that I would like to talk about and discuss, and I will, that are not necessarily popular or mainstream at all, or big box office hits. In fact, I'm interested in all kinds of films. I mean, one of my favorite films of all time is from Federico Fellini and the Knights of Cavalria, not to mention La Strada. In fact, La Strada might be the saddest love story ever made, but of course, anyone maybe watching the review that I do of that may not be interested in my thoughts on Star Wars, or for that matter, vice versa. So, but the point I'm trying to make is this: Star Wars is not responsible for where cinema is today. And let's be clear rather than generalize, American cinema. That is to say, the idea of the franchise and Marvel Comics coming up with film adaptations of all of their comics, literally, and all becoming big box office hits, and other superhero movies and superheroes on television. Of course, that is not all you really do see. I mean, that is what makes the most money, because it sells overseas. Kind of like Iron Man 3 when that was first shown in China instead of here first. That tells you a lot right there. The overseas is where it really counts. Adventures of Tintin, huge hit outside of the US, not so much here, but first shown outside the US before it made it here. Anyway, Star Wars, it set a whole new precedent. Because what it did was, here was a movie that everybody wanted to go see. It was pure entertainment. It was pure escapism. And it established a merchandising line for toys and bed sheets and cups and all kinds of things Star Wars related. I mean, I'm sure Star Wars cereals. I mean, it's funny to me hearing comments from people saying George Lucas made more Star Wars movies so he could make more toys. Well, but that's exactly what happened with the first Star Wars. It just happened that way. So, of course, kids are going to collect these action figures, and I used to too. In fact, I still have some action figures, I don't mind saying. One of them being this guy right here, one of the Wookiees from Star Wars Episode 3. Very proud to have this. Not to mention Han Solo. A little dusty, but that's okay. From Return of the Jedi. That's a really cool action figure with the gun in his holster. Anyway, and one of my personal favorite characters from the prequels, Count Dooku, Christopher Lee. So, yeah, I do collect some of these as well. But my point is this: aside from the merchandising and the money, the studios, what they do is whenever a movie becomes a huge hit, they want to replicate it. They want it to be ubiquitous. Like, we all want to do the same exact movie. So that happened with Star Wars, happened with Raiders of the Lost Ark when it was released 4 years later. Same thing. Oh, wait, let's make a movie like that. But, we'll change it a little. And, oh, wait, no, let's rip this off and let's do that. And it becomes a thing, and then eventually it dies off. So the studios lacked imagination. See, because George Lucas had a passion for making movies. He had a passion for doing Star Wars, and we all know that. Just like Martin Scorsese had a passion for making Taxi Driver, or Fellini for any of the films he made, or Akira Kurosawa. So the passion didn't change, but the studios didn't see it that way. They just wanted they wanted to make money. And when something makes an astronomical amount of money like Star Wars did, that's what they want to do. So what happened in 1977 and afterwards was the decline of the personal vision by directors who told stories, not just on a personal basis, but stories that were a little darker, that focused on their own identities that didn't match up with mass appeal. They just didn't. I mean, Taxi Driver was apparently a hit in 1976. It's unbelievable even today to think a film like that did not just cause a stir, but made some money. But that doesn't change the fact that, of course, it didn't make Star Wars money. It didn't even make the kind of money some of Scorsese's films have lately. So, the visions of, like, for example, Scorsese with New York, New York, which was a huge flop in 1977, and then Raging Bull in 1980, also a huge flop. King of Comedy, also a huge flop. In fact, the biggest flop of that year, 1983. Hal Ashby, this is a guy who did films like Shampoo, and then suddenly, and Harold and Maude, and suddenly towards the end of the 70s started to lose his luster. Same with William Friedkin. So their stories that did not necessarily cater to the masses, that were their own stories, were not making the money. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, however, well, they understood what it is that audiences wanted to see, or at least they thought, because again, like I said, George Lucas didn't know Star Wars was going to be a hit. I guess he hoped. Spielberg also hoped he would have a hit, Raiders of the Lost Ark, to bounce back from the colossal flop, which was 1941, a film that he made in 1979. So they didn't know, but they kind of they understand that they're able to cultivate what it is that people may want to see in a movie theater. So they just know what that is. It's not to say Spielberg always makes a hit, and he hasn't had a major blockbuster really, if you think about it, in quite some time. But Star Wars is a guaranteed hit. Everybody knows Star Wars, and it's still a pop phenomenon, and it finds new fans every generation. So it's not Star Wars' fault that the independent filmmakers who were using Hollywood big budgets to make movies, that started to erode. It's not Star Wars' fault. It's the studios. Their lack of imagination, their willingness to take a trip into the more offbeat side that didn't appeal to everyone. They didn't give them that kind of money anymore. And that's really, in many ways, that might even be the fault of Michael Cimino when you really get down to it. Heaven's Gate in 1980, which I don't have the figures with me, but that was a huge budget, and it failed like you wouldn't believe. It bankrupted a studio. I mean, that's the biggest failure you can have, is when you bankrupt a studio. The irony, of course, is that Orion Pictures, that had films like Silence of the Lambs, and I believe they had RoboCop and all these movies that did well, also failed as a studio. So, sometimes it's really not the fault of one director. But the point is that the independent personal side from some of these filmmakers that didn't want to cater to the masses, or their stories didn't, they couldn't have the budgets that were given to George Lucas or Steven Spielberg, because they didn't make money. So they became independent. Peter Bogdanovich also suffered a lot through the 80s. He still got to make films, but it hasn't been an easy career, but it isn't an easy career for any director. So don't blame it all on Star Wars. All you people that want to do that and say it was the death of cinema, there's still great movies being made. They're just not coming all from Hollywood, that's for sure. But that's not to say there are none coming from Hollywood. That I object to. There's still some, even on television, there are some good shows. There are better shows now than there used to be even 10 years ago. I mean, in the 90s, I can't even remember 2 shows, aside from Seinfeld, that I would even watch on a regular basis, because most of them just didn't appeal to me at all. And with movies, it's always a topsy-turvy thing. Sometimes a movie does extraordinarily well, but with a smaller budget, but not many of them make Star Wars money. And that's the difference. So, there you go. Don't blame it all on Star Wars, just blame it on the studios. And this is Jerry Saravia at the movies, signing off.